Next issue.
Yes, Dr. Jana Price is here from the Office of Research and Engineering to give the presentation, Reduced Accidents and Incidents Caused by Human Fatigue in the Aviation Industry.
Good afternoon. In the aviation mode, there are 6 open fatigue-related recommendations. 3 concern flight crews, 1 concerns aircraft maintenance personnel, and 2 concern air traffic controllers. Of the 3 recommendations concerning flight crews, 2 urge the FAA to prohibit the use of a loophole that allows commercial flight crews to do training or repositioning flights after exceeding their scheduled duty day. The third asks the FAA to modify and simplify flight crew hours of service to reflect several factors that affect crew alertness. It was issued as the result of the 2004 Corporate Airlines accident in Kirksville, Missouri, and superseded previous recommendations that called for revisions to duty hours regulations. Most flight crew duty and flight time limits were set in 1938 and 1958 and have not been substantially updated since that time. In recent years, the Safety Board has investigated several accidents and incidents in which flight crew fatigue issues were identified, including the 2007 Shuttle America runway overrun in Cleveland, Ohio, the 2007 Pinnacle Airlines runway overrun in Traverse City, Michigan, the 2008 Go Airlines overfly of Hilo, Hawaii, and the 2009 Colgan Air loss of control accident in Buffalo, New York. In June 2009, the FAA administrator stated that the FAA would work rapidly to develop and implement a new rule based on fatigue science and a review of international approaches. The agency established an aviation rulemaking committee that included FAA, labor, and industry representatives, which submitted recommendations to the FAA in September 2009. FAA has since committed to publishing the rule in early 2010. Currently, all 3 of these recommendations are open, unacceptable, pending this action. The Board has also recommended that the FAA review fatigue issues among aircraft maintenance personnel and establish scientifically based duty hours for them. The duty time limitations for aircraft maintenance workers do not currently include any maximum daily or weekly work hours, nor do they include minimum off-duty periods, with the exception of requiring 1 24-hour off-duty period during any 7 consecutive days. Although FAA studies have shown that fatigue is a serious problem among maintenance workers, no subsequent efforts have been made to modify their hours of service regulations. For several years, the FAA has stated that they believe that training aviation maintenance workers in fatigue management is the most appropriate approach to the problem, and they have progressed with that approach. In other correspondence with FAA, the NTSB has stated that such systems hold promise as a complement to, but not as a replacement for, revised flight and duty time regulations. As such, the status of the recommendation remains open, unacceptable response. Air traffic controllers have also been identified as being at risk due to fatigue. There are 2 open safety recommendations on the most wanted list directed towards air traffic controllers. AO 730 asks the FAA to address controller fatigue by revising work scheduling, policies, and practices, and AO 732 is a companion recommendation to the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, or NATCA. These recommendations were issued based on several events involving controller fatigue, including the 2006 Calm Air accident in Lexington, Kentucky. In response to AO 730, the FAA established a work group that included FAA and various controller labor organizations to address controller scheduling policies and practices. According to recent correspondence from the FAA, the work group's original recommendations, including a revision to the FAA order governing controller work shifts, or 7210.3, were not made in favor of pursuing a stronger collaboration with NATCA through the establishment of a dedicated fatigue risk management office within the air traffic organization. A new set of recommendations is anticipated from the work group in April 2010. The Fatigue Risk Management Office has also stated it will sponsor a NASA Ames controller fatigue study to gather field data on controller fatigue and to set a baseline for the evaluation of future fatigue mitigations. The study is also scheduled to begin in April of 2010. In June of 2008, the Safety Board issued 2 recommendations to the FAA to develop guidance for operators to establish fatigue management systems and to develop and use a methodology to evaluate the success of such systems. The Safety Board has stated that fatigue management systems can serve an important role as a complement to science-based hours of service regulations. These systems typically employ multiple countermeasures such as medical screening and treatment of sleep disorders, attendance policies that allow for calling in fatigued, commuting policies, education about fatigue. Shortly after the recommendations were issued, the FAA sponsored a symposium on fatigue management that included discussions of fatigue risk factors and mitigation strategies among flight crews, maintenance personnel, and air traffic controllers. FAA also has worked with Delta Airlines to develop a fatigue countermeasures program for crew on ultra-long range, or ULR flights, that are flights of more than 16 hours that were not covered by existing duty hours regulations. This program was approved as an operations specification issued for specific routes. In November 2008, FAA attempted to expand the operations specification to other airlines with ULR routes, but later withdrew the proposed amendments due to threats of legal action from several carriers. Since that time, FAA has published a safety alert for operators, or SAFO, that recommends that short-haul operators review their current policies for addressing crew member fatigue. They have also stated that they are developing an advisory circular that will provide guidance for including fatigue risk management systems within air carrier safety management systems. This concludes my presentation, and I'm prepared to answer any questions that the board may have.
Member Somewhat.
Thank you. I'm really glad to see the fatigue management system being proposed as being added to the most wanted list. And as I recall, that was a case where a board member, I believe it was Member Higgins, that then when we had the Shuttle America board meeting, brought that up. And on June the 10th, as a result of Member Higgins bringing that up, staff went back and learned about this topic. And on June the 10th of that year, which was 2008, we had a board meeting where we specifically addressed recommendations in that area. At least that's my recollection of it. And I think that shows a couple of things. It shows that sometimes staff bring something to the process, and it also shows that board members do typically spend a lot of time trying to learn the issues and get ready for board meetings. But that thought of Member Higgins's did not fall on deaf ears. Staff picked up the ball big time and ran with it. And here, a year and a half later, a year and a half from the time we put it on that we adopted the recommendation, we're now putting it on the most wanted list. And I think it's very relevant, an appropriate recommendation, and I think a lot of the industry is talking about fatigue management systems. So thank you for doing the hard work, realizing that it's a timely topic, and moving forward with it. I applaud your efforts there. I want to ask you a question about A06-10, and this is the one where we say modify and simplify the flight crew hours of service regulations and take into consideration factors such as length of duty day, start times, workload, and other factors shown by recent research, scientific evidence, and current industry experience to affect flight crew alertness. And I just want to get a read from this because after sitting here today, I think I've calibrated my mind, but it's still a question that I'm going to ask. Is staff satisfied with that being unacceptable response, given that the FAA has at least started into a rulemaking process on that one?
Well, I think part of the answer of that is that even though the label of this recommendation is A06-10, it is a recommendation that has a longer history than that. It goes back. It was superseded, I think, if I'm not mistaken, twice previously. So part of it is that we've just waited so very long for this to happen. I do think that staff is encouraged by what we've seen recently and the momentum that appears to be happening with FAA.
Yes, and I don't think it's how long it's waited to get here, but are they doing enough now to change it? But after sitting through, and that's a question I had as I prepped for the board meeting, But to be clear, as I stand right now, after just making an argument a little while ago for, well, you know, here they said that the FAA said on a helicopter EMS situation where they were going to initiate the rulemaking process, and I'm sure they are scurrying very fast behind the scenes to make things happen. We haven't seen the NPRM yet, and I think we can say the same about this and still be consistent. That yes, we know that there's been some activity, and the administrator says it's going to be out by the end of the year, but now that's slipped until a little bit later in the year. So what I'm really trying to do is make sure that I am calibrated properly. And I think after listening to this morning's discussions, I do think that unacceptable response is appropriate, and that's what staff is proposing, but I just kind of wanted to hash through that to make sure that everyone on staff and my colleagues were comfortable with that as well. But I believe I'm to the point where I do think that's the appropriate classification. Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Vice Chairman?
No questions, thank you.
Well, Member Sunwalt, I'm glad that you raised that issue, because if you hadn't, I would have. It is the one that I sit here and I look at, and you know, it is a little bit challenging because we have seen so little action since the NPRM in 1995. I think Administrator Babbitt's call to action and the quick fuse ARC that he put together, the 45-day ARC that actually did come out with some recommendations, and I know that there wasn't a single consensus recommendation, but I think that our sense is from the information that we gleaned that some of the recommendations that did come out would be responsive to our recommendation. I think where we are right now is really just by virtue of the fact of the time that we consider this recommendation, its classification. They had promoted that they're going to have this quick fuse ARC, and they were going to get the rule out in a relatively short time frame after the ARC completed their work. Then that slipped to the end of the year. Then it was January, and in January we heard it was spring. And so I think I would have probably been otherwise inclined, nobody fall out of your chair, to give them some brownie points for all the work that they've tried to do. I think our challenge is always just that the proof's in the pudding. You know, at the end of the day, there can be a lot of good work that goes on, but you got to get the thing published, and then you have to get it finalized. And we're a long way from that. And so given that we've had false starts on this issue in the past, I think it would probably be premature, given the concerns that we've had, to give them to push them up on this one. So, go ahead.
And I agree. Again, as I was prepping for the meeting, I was struggling with that. But again, after sitting here today and just sort of talking through some other issues, I am at that point there. I would caution you, though, that avoid using words like pudding and brownies, because it does make me hungry. But
I'll bake brownies for the FAA if they get this rulemaking done. So, the other issue that I had some concern about, and this was again one where I think there was a false start, and this was the controller fatigue. We had a meeting with the FAA and NACA last year to try to figure out where this was going. I think we were given clear, indication that they were going to be able to change things without having to do a rulemaking or reopen labor agreements. They thought they could just unilaterally make the changes, and there was an effort to try to reclassify this recommendation before the board meeting based on that commitment, and it wasn't until we checked with them in January when they said it was going to be that effort was going to be finalized in January that we found out it wasn't, and they weren't even close to getting it addressed. And so I wonder if we feel that we need to send a signal and move the status or the classification of that recommendation to a different place if we still feel like it's acceptable.
Well, I think you raised some excellent points. I think that we had high hopes that there was going to be a change to the FAA order governing air traffic controllers' schedules. It really looked like that was going to happen, and then it didn't. And I do think that there is good faith involved in their current efforts to pull back and reorganize, and they're claiming that they're going to be moving forward with a more comprehensive approach. And based on what I see, I do think that is an effort that they're making in good faith. But that said, it's not clear evidence of progress.
And perhaps the Vice Chairman wants to chime in here. I think one of the unique things that we did when we issued this recommendation is we actually issued companion recommendations. And we really kind of said it's both entities' responsibility. This is not just to the FAA to address fatigue. It's not just to the controllers to address fatigue, but that they need to work together. And I think one of the concerns I've had, too, is that it hasn't appeared, at least thus far, that that was a collaborative effort. And what I'd like to see is going forward is if they figured out that they can't do it unilaterally and they're going to have to work together to do it, I'd really like to see some progress on them working together to try to address this. And not be in a position where we're having to look at responses that look like he said, she said, and really to take this up and work on it together, because at the end of the day, it's going to affect FAA operations, and it's going to affect the controllers' life and their lifestyle and how they perform on the job. And so this is a joint problem to be solved together. I don't know if the Vice Chairman has any comments based on his past experience.
Only to say that I fully agree, because to the extent, the controllers are eventually going to have to live by it and do it and breathe it and live it, so they certainly need to be involved in developing it from the outset. Hopefully it will not be sort of an administrative fiat from above, if you will, from management saying, labor, we've got the solution for you, but instead it will be a collaborative labor management solution.
So maybe what we can do is check back in with the FAA given and the controllers, given that last March they had kind of indicated to us that this was going in the right direction. Maybe get a briefing back from them, because I think it was a shock to our staff to find in January that they had not done what they said that they were going to do, and they couldn't actually accomplish it. So I think we need to figure out what the next steps are, and I'd like to ask the staff if maybe they could request again a briefing to try to get an update on this. I think it would be more productive than having an exchange of letters, which I think did not prove fruitful in the past.
I'd be happy to follow up on that.
And perhaps the Vice Chairman could help us address that issue. Is there a recommendation from the staff about this issue area?
Yes. Staff proposes that this issue area remain on the most wanted list and that it retain its red timeliness designation. Although progress on certain recommendations has accelerated greatly over the past year, many of the recommendations that are finally being addressed are more than a decade old. Staff further recommends that safety recommendations A0844 and A0845 concerning fatigue management systems be added to this issue area.
So moved.
All in favor, signal with a hand and aye. Aye. The issue area remains on the list. 2 recommendations are added, and it retains a red designation. We're ready for the next group. Thank you, Dr. Brenner and Dr. Price.
Can I ask a quick question before we are fatigue management systems typically included or not included in the generic designation of safety management systems? I'm not sure who to address that question to.
Well, I think that there definitely has been some discussion about trying to, not only in aviation, but in other modes as well, incorporating fatigue risk management systems into an overall safety management system. And really, it makes sense because they both follow a similar kind of philosophy. So yes, there has been discussion about incorporating it under that umbrella.
Thank you.
Actually, thank you, Vice Chairman, for raising that point. Before you all go away, one of the questions that I had for you all is we've had recommendations about as long as we've had recommendations on the pilot records and pilot training issue on SMS, and we just added SMS on for maritime to the most wanted list today. Did staff consider adding our SMS recommendations to the most wanted list in this round?
I'd like to give aviation a little more time. However, I have some proposals I'd like to discuss for the next go-around on the most wanted. Okay.
I think one of the concerns that I have is it's something that we're not even in compliance with respect to international standards. The FAA had to file a difference because they had not even completed their rulemaking activities on SMS systems. And I think the Vice Chairman raised a good point. A lot of people see FRMS systems as a subset of what goes on in SMS. And so I think it's great we're acting on fatigue risk management systems, and I think it's appropriate we should do that. But I think that the bigger picture is SMS, and we need to look at what we're doing in other modes and determine if we think this is important in this mode, then it should be addressed too. So look forward to next year and then new issues. I do want to stress that this is a dynamic product, and I think it's more effective if it is dynamic. We don't want to have it be so stale with the same issues every year that it never changes. And so thank you for bringing a new issue to the list and for adding the pilot proficiency as well. Thanks.
Chairman Hersman, I would like to add that my office has taken on an activity this year to try to educate ourselves better in the SMS environment, not only in aviation but in all modes. So we see this as an emerging issue, actually one that's upon us now, and we're trying to come up to speed as quickly as possible. So we do have some activities in mind this year. Actually, I'm asking Jana Price to take the lead in some of that. So we expect that we'll be more knowledgeable in this area in the upcoming year.
Very good. We thank you for your initiative, and we look forward to entertaining the new directions that staff wants to take the board.
We have a slightly larger table shift at this point.